They say loyalty is priceless until you ask to be paid what you're worth. My manager smirked when I brought up a 20% raise after 10 years of unwavering service. He didn't even try to hide it. That half-second curl of his lip told me everything. To him, my value was fixed, and I was foolish to think otherwise. My name is Lauren. I've been with the company for a full decade, through mergers, restructurings, hiring freezes, and budget cuts. I was the steady hand in chaos, the one who stayed when others left, the quiet backbone of our data operations. I didn't climb the ladder for glory. I did it because I cared. About the team, about the work. And I believed, naively perhaps, that at some point, someone would notice. But what do you do when you realize your loyalty is being used as a discount? This year had been rough. My daughter just got accepted into college, an amazing achievement, but one with a price tag. My mother's medical bills were climbing fast. The rising cost of everything, from gas to groceries, meant I had to reconsider my finances. A modest raise wasn't just a want. It had become a need. So I asked. I didn't come in demanding the moon. I scheduled a meeting, prepared a one-page summary of my contributions over the past 5 years, and calmly explained why I was requesting a 20% adjustment to my salary. His response? A laugh. A short, sharp exhale through his nose, followed by, 20%? Lauren, you know we don't do that here. That's not how internal promotions work. I tried to hold my composure, but something inside me broke. Not because he said no, but because of the way he said it. Like I was naive. Like asking to be compensated fairly was some childish fantasy. He went on to say that HR caps all internal raises at 10%. Even that's rare, he added, as if to warn me not to dream too big. He wrapped it all up with a patronizing smile and a casual dismissal. If money's that important to you, maybe look outside. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at a college tuition bill and my mother's latest prescription invoice. I thought about the weekend I'd just spent cleaning up a broken data pipeline while he was golfing in Arizona. About the time I canceled a family trip because the team was short-staffed. About how many times I'd said yes while swallowing the quiet no rising in my throat. And I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, I had received a LinkedIn message from a recruiter. I never replied. It was still sitting there, unread. I opened it. Hi, Lauren. We're building a new team and your experience caught our eye. Would you be open to a conversation? I stared at it for a long time. Then I clicked reply. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the recruiter's message, but because of everything that came before it. The smirk, the dismissive tone, the way he made me feel like I was asking for something unreasonable. I had spent 10 years believing I was part of something bigger. Turns out I was just convenient. The next morning, I put on my usual calm expression and walked into the office like nothing happened. That's what we do, right? Especially women like me, who've learned that emotion in the workplace is often seen as weakness. So I smiled, replied to emails, took notes in meetings, and even cracked a joke or two. But under the surface, something had shifted. I began to pay closer attention. To the subtle ways my efforts were invisible. My name wasn't mentioned during our last quarterly review. Even though I'd pulled all-nighters to clean up a project that could have cost us the client, a junior analyst got praised for work I'd mentored them through. My manager used words like team effort when it was really Matt doing the heavy lifting. I thought of all the missed birthdays, the canceled plans, the late nights. I thought about how my daughter once asked, Mom, do you even like your job? And I didn't know what to say. I thought about how many times I'd told myself, it'll pay off eventually. Eventually never came. So I replied to the recruiter. We scheduled a call for Thursday. I told no one. That week, I worked harder than ever. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I wanted to leave with my head held high. There's something quietly powerful about doing your job well, even after you've been made to feel small. That's the part they never understand. On Thursday, I slipped into a quiet conference room and took the call. The woman on the other end was direct but kind. She asked about my experience, my interests, and what I was looking for in a new role. I told her the truth. I want to be valued, not just for what I do, but for who I am. I want to work somewhere where my silence isn't mistaken for weakness. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Lauren, I think you're exactly what we need." The following day, I had a formal interview. 2 days later, an offer landed in my inbox. 26%. That was the raise. More than I asked my own manager for. More than I thought I could even get. But the offer wasn't just about money. It came with something I hadn't felt in years: respect. The role would place me in a leadership position, guiding a small team and helping shape the company's data strategy moving forward. They didn't see me as a cog. They saw me as a voice. I sat with it for a night. Then, as a courtesy, I messaged my manager. "If you're open to meeting the 20% we discussed, I'd be happy to stay. I love the team, but this new opportunity would be hard to walk away from." He replied 3 hours later. "We have policies in place. You know the cap. Best of luck." And just like that, my decision was made. I stared at his reply for a long time. "We have policies in place. You know the cap. Best of luck." Best of luck? After 10 years of building systems, mentoring staff, smoothing client tempers, and sacrificing my personal life for quarterly deadlines, best of luck was all he had to offer? I wasn't angry at the words themselves. I was angry at the casual way they dismissed me, as if I were just another folder in his inbox to be archived and forgotten. So, I let the silence between us grow. No emotional farewell, no second-guessing. I quietly accepted the offer from the new company and began drafting my 2-week notice. My last act of professionalism, I told myself. In the days that followed, I continued to show up and deliver as if nothing had changed. But something had. People started to notice. "You seem lighter," a colleague said. Another joked, "You finally take a vacation or something?" If only they knew. I was simply free from waiting for recognition that would never come. Then came Friday. I walked into my manager's office, printed resignation letter in hand. He was on a call, gesturing animatedly, his eyes flicking toward me without acknowledgement. I waited silently, then set the letter on his desk and turned to leave. He ended the call abruptly. "Lauren, what's this?" I looked back. "My resignation, effective 2 weeks from today." He blinked. "You're leaving?" I nodded. "To where?" I smiled politely. "An opportunity that met my expectations." The room fell silent. No jokes, no smirks. Just confusion and something else. Panic? Regret? Maybe both. "Didn't think you'd actually walk," he muttered under his breath. Too late. The following Monday, the ripple effects began. First, a client emailed asking to speak directly with me. It was one of our biggest accounts, one I had personally onboarded and managed for years. They didn't want to talk to anyone else. They said they'd wait until Lauren's available. When they learned I was leaving, they asked where I was going. I answered honestly. 3 days later, that same client notified my former employer that they were pausing their upcoming renewal pending internal changes. That may sound vague on the surface, but internally, everyone knew what it meant. They were following me, and it was more than just one account. Apparently, my departure had raised a red flag with multiple long-standing clients who were used to working directly with me. They weren't angry. I had always been honest and supportive, but they were disappointed. Too disappointed to ignore it. I was stunned. Not because I didn't know I had strong client relationships, but because I never realized how much those relationships mattered. How fragile loyalty really was when the human connection was removed. "Lauren, can we talk?" My manager texted midweek. Too late. I kept my final days professional but short, wrapped up projects, handed over documentation, left everything clean. On my last day, there was no cake, no group email, No awkward goodbyes in the break room. Just a quiet nod from the admin, a few hushed thank yous, and a surprised look from one senior VP I had once saved in a data compliance mess. It hurt a little, walking out without fanfare, but it also felt right. And then came the call. Not from my old manager, from a senior client executive, the kind of person who rarely reaches out directly. "I just heard you moved," he said. "If you're building something new, we want in. Keep us in mind." I was speechless for a moment, too surprised to answer, too validated to hide the smile in my voice. "Absolutely," I said. By the end of that week, my new employer had 3 new client inquiries, each initiated by contacts I had quietly built trust with over the years. I didn't pitch. I didn't persuade. I didn't even ask. They came because they believed in me. Looking back, I should have felt bitter. Angry at the years I gave away too cheaply. Furious at the way I was pushed out with a laugh and a half-hearted email. But I wasn't. Because this was better than any apology. By Monday morning, the mood in my old office had shifted from awkward silence to barely concealed anxiety. Rumors swirled. 3 major clients had delayed renewals. The same clients I had spent years nurturing, guiding through contract changes, regulatory updates, and tech migrations. They weren't just accounts on a spreadsheet. They were relationships. Relationships my former manager had always taken for granted. He looked shaken. I heard from a colleague, one of the few I still trusted, that upper management had called him in for a closed-door meeting. "They want to know how you slipped through the cracks," she whispered over lunch. "And why no one tried to stop you." Too little, too late. I had always assumed I was invisible to the higher-ups. Apparently not. Turns out, they noticed my absence the moment clients started asking uncomfortable questions like, "Why wasn't Lauren retained?" and "Who's managing her transition?" No one had an answer. And the worst part? My old manager had none either. He hadn't planned for it, because he never believed I'd actually leave. I think in his mind, I was the kind of employee who'd grumble quietly, maybe update her resume, but never follow through. That miscalculation was about to cost him. By midweek, I received a text from another former colleague. "He's in trouble. They're investigating how he handled salary caps and internal promotions. Something about informal policies being used as excuses." Wow. A part of me was genuinely stunned. I had always known there were politics behind closed doors, but I never expected them to unravel so quickly. One decision, one laugh, one denied raise, and now, everything was shifting. Another day, another message. This one from HR. "Hi, Lauren. We hope you're doing well. Would you be open to a conversation about your experience here? We're conducting an internal review." Too late. Far, far too late. What surprised me most wasn't their sudden concern. It was how quickly they moved to damage control once clients got involved. When it was just me asking for fair pay, laughed off. But now that business was being threatened, meetings, emails, investigations. How frustrating and revealing that profit speaks louder than people. Meanwhile, at my new job, I was thriving. In just 1 week, I'd already been looped into key strategy discussions. My ideas were met with curiosity, not condescension. I was learning again, challenged, respected, seen, and then something unexpected happened. My new director called me into his office. "We've been approached by a few of your former clients," he said. "They asked for you specifically. We're open to onboarding them if you're willing to lead the transition." I was floored. Not just flattered, floored. After years of being someone they hid in the background, I was now someone they wanted front and center. "Yes," I said. "I'd be honored." And just like that, the tables had turned completely. Lauren, the woman who wasn't worth 20%, was now bringing in 6-figure contracts to a new company that recognized her value. 2 weeks after I started my new role, I received an anonymous message in my LinkedIn inbox. "He's out." They reassigned him to an internal special projects team, No direct reports, no client access. I had to read it twice. Gone. Just like that. The man who laughed at me, who belittled my request, who joked about my lack of loyalty in front of the team, was now quietly swept out of sight. Not fired, of course. That would have made too much noise. But stripped of power? Yes. Absolutely. I won't lie. Part of me felt stunned. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because it happened so fast. I thought it would take months for consequences to trickle down. I underestimated how much pressure client trust can exert on a corporate structure. Apparently, the leadership team had uncovered more than just miscommunication. Several employees had come forward during the internal review, describing similar experiences: requests denied, performance overlooked, and promotions blocked for vague, unwritten reasons. Turns out, he'd been using the 10% cap as an excuse to maintain control. HR had no record of such a policy. What struck me most was how many of my former colleagues messaged me quietly, thanking me. "Your story gave me the courage to speak up." I always thought it was just me. I stayed too long, too afraid to look elsewhere. You showed it was possible. I never set out to be anyone's example. I just wanted fairness, respect, a salary that matched my worth. But suddenly, my quiet exit had become a ripple, and that ripple was now a wave. At my new company, things moved quickly. The clients who followed me over were onboarded within 2 weeks. I was asked to lead the integration team, bridging their systems into our workflows. Meetings that I used to be excluded from were now mine to run. And at the end of my first full month, my new director pulled me aside. "We'd like you to speak at the upcoming leadership roundtable," he said. "Talk about your transition and what retaining top talent really looks like." I almost laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief. Just weeks ago, I was sitting across from someone who thought I wasn't worth listening to. And now, I was being invited to speak about how companies should treat people like me. Too joyful for words. On the day of the roundtable, I stood in front of a dozen senior leaders, hands only slightly trembling. "I spent 10 years doing everything right," I began. "I gave loyalty, patience, quiet resilience, and when I finally asked for something small, something fair, I was told to know my place. I did, and I left it." The room was silent. I went on to describe not the pain of being undervalued, but the freedom that came with finally walking away. The clarity, the quiet power of knowing your worth. After the session, one executive came up and said, "I wish someone like you had been here 5 years ago. We lost too many Laurens." That hit me harder than I expected. Later that evening, I opened an email from an old friend still at my former company. He shared a screenshot from an internal newsletter. My former manager's name was listed under a newly formed administrative operations group, buried near the bottom, just above office maintenance. Too ironic for words. But here's what truly floored me. A second screenshot. This one was a quote pulled from their HR update. "We recognize the need to reevaluate our internal compensation guidelines to better retain and respect experienced contributors." Too little, too late. But finally something. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't need to. The systems that once held me down had now, in their own way, validated every choice I made. And while they scrambled to revise policy and rebuild trust, I was already charting new territory, designing onboarding processes, mentoring junior analysts, and building something sustainable and fair. No one had to be torn down for me to rise, but some systems needed to break. It's strange how quiet victory can feel. There was no parade, no confetti, no cinematic moment of triumph. Just the steady rhythm of work that mattered, the kind that filled you up instead of draining you dry. Each morning, I arrived at my new desk, sunlight streaming through tall windows, coffee already brewing in the common area, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. It wasn't about the raise, though I'll admit the financial relief was real. It wasn't even about the title, though I took pride in being called director by people who genuinely looked to me for leadership. It was about peace, about walking into a room and not needing to prove that I belonged there. One afternoon, I passed a junior analyst pacing nervously outside the conference room. She had just presented her first proposal, and from the way she wrung her hands, it hadn't gone as smoothly as she hoped. I stopped. "You did well," I said softly. She looked at me, surprised. "You think so?" "I do," I nodded. "Your clarity stood out. And your idea on the predictive model? It's sharp. Don't second-guess yourself just because the room is quiet." She exhaled, shoulders eased. And I saw in her eyes the same version of me 10 years ago, eager, competent, waiting for someone to say "I see you." I made a mental note. No one on my team will wait a decade to feel valued. That night, I posted a short note on LinkedIn. Nothing dramatic, just a reflection. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's observation. And when the right moment comes, silence becomes action. Walk away when you're not seen. Walk into where you're meant to shine. It was a quiet post, but it resonated. Dozens of comments came in, some from people I knew, most from strangers. People shared stories of staying too long in places that didn't grow with them. Some were still there. Some were finally gathering the courage to leave. The next morning, my inbox held 3 unexpected messages, one from an ex-colleague who had once defended our old manager. She wrote, "I didn't see it before, but watching how things unfolded, I owe you an apology, and maybe a thank you." Another from a former client, now at a new firm. "Are you taking on new partnerships? I'd love to collaborate again." And one from someone I didn't know at all. "Your story gave me permission to expect more. Thank you." I sat there, reading those words slowly. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. Because sometimes we think all we did was leave a job, but what we really did was change the story. For ourselves, and for the people watching, silently wondering if they could do the same. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was renewal. And somewhere, I knew, they were still talking about me at the old office, not in whispers of bitterness, but in questions. How did we let her go? Why didn't we listen? What could we have done differently? And maybe, just maybe, someone in that room is thinking, "I won't make that mistake again." Weeks passed, and with every passing day, I settled more fully into my new chapter. The pressure in my chest, the one I didn't even know I'd been carrying for years, had finally lifted. I was no longer trying to earn my place. I was trusted, not tested. I was invited into conversations, not kept at the edge of them. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was growing. There's a quiet kind of joy in waking up and not dreading your calendar. Sometimes, in moments of stillness, I think about how close I came to staying. How easily I could have swallowed the disrespect one more time, told myself to wait another quarter, another year, another empty promise, and how devastating that would have been. I now realize that leaving wasn't just an act of courage, it was an act of self-respect, a refusal to shrink in rooms that refused to expand. I didn't need to burn bridges. I simply built a better one and walked across it. What surprised me most was how many people followed. Not in a literal sense, but emotionally. They watched my story unfold, not for the drama, but for the permission it gave them to reimagine their own. Sometimes, it takes just one person to say, "Enough." And suddenly, others start seeing their own enough too. And to think it all began with a smirk. One small moment that told me everything I needed to know. If you've ever been told to wait your turn, to be grateful you even have a job, or that this is just how it works, I hope this story reminds you, you are allowed to expect more. Your silence doesn't mean you're weak, and walking away is not failure. It's growth. Have you ever stayed too long in a place that didn't see you, or left, and watched everything change because you finally did? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below, or share this with someone who needs to hear that, yes, they are worth more. Let's keep this conversation going. The hum of the overhead lights blended with the quiet rhythm of keyboards around me as I worked through the latest stack of vendor reconciliations. My screen was cluttered with numbers, formulas, and half-finished notes when the email dropped into my inbox. The subject line glared back at me in all caps. Confidential, do not forward. Except, it had been sent to the entire finance operations team. Marcus Hale from HR must have slipped, hitting the wrong distribution list. My first instinct was to assume a recall message would follow any second, but it didn't. Instead, curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. What opened wasn't a policy update or compliance memo. It was a spreadsheet, names, positions, salaries, raw, unfiltered truth. I told myself I'd glance quickly, then close it, but my eyes locked on the numbers. Jordan Price, 8 months in, 139. Mia Rowan, barely a year, $1,4,500. Ethan Cole, 2 years in, 143. Then my own line appeared. Elawan Hart, 11 years, $92,000. For a moment, the room tilted. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. But the chill I felt wasn't from the cup in my hand. It was the slap of realization. I had trained Jordan myself, explaining deferred revenue to him on a whiteboard last quarter. Mia still came to me with questions on the month-end close. Ethan once admitted he didn't know the difference between CapEx and OpEx until I walked him through it in 4 bullet points. And yet, they were each earning more, much more. My pay lagged behind by nearly 45%. I blinked, hoping I had misread. But the numbers didn't change. Across the floor, Jordan was laughing at something on his phone. Oblivious. Mia tapped at a template I had written months ago. Ethan leaned back with his headphones on, as if he had mastered the very systems I had designed. The betrayal didn't come as a shout or a dramatic outburst. It was quieter, heavier. 11 years of loyalty, extra hours, canceled vacations, all summed up in a single line of digits. For a long moment, I just stared at the spreadsheet, letting the weight of it press down. Then, I did the only thing I could. I saved it to my flash drive and closed my screen. I wasn't going to storm into Marcus's office or throw papers across the room. That wasn't me. But I also wasn't going to let this go. Something had shifted, quietly but permanently, and the next move was mine. Before we move on, let me check in with you. Have you relaxed your hands and fingers today? Just unclenching your fists and rolling your wrists a few times can ease the tension more than you think. By the way, where are you watching from right now? If you enjoy stories like this, a quick tap on the like button and hitting subscribe means you won't miss what's coming next. I didn't leave right away after saving the spreadsheet. Instead, I sat at my desk, letting the glow of the monitor fade from shocking discovery into cold resolve. My pulse was steady, not racing, and that steadiness told me something had already shifted. The betrayal wasn't just about money, it was about being invisible, about watching years of work weighed and found cheap. By the time I stood up, I knew exactly where I was going. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual, the air thick with a quiet tension only I could feel. When the doors opened, I didn't pause at the receptionist's desk or wait for a scheduled slot. I walked straight to Trevor Lang's office, as CFO. He was the one who signed off on every budget line. He couldn't pretend not to know. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open, stepped inside, and set my laptop on his desk. The spreadsheet glowed against the dark screen as I turned it toward him. I need to understand this. Trevor froze, as if I had slapped him. His eyes flicked to the data, then to me, then back again. He tried to mask it with a calm expression, but the hesitation gave him away. "Elawan," he began, voice rehearsed. "This might be a case of different market conditions." I said nothing, only raised an eyebrow. He shifted in his chair, fumbling with explanations that sounded more like excuses. New hiring brackets, shifting salary caps, competitive adjustments. You know how it is, he added, like we were sharing some inside joke about corporate bureaucracy. But there was no joke, not anymore. I let the silence stretch until his words fell flat. Then he leaned forward, his tone harder now. Look, this is what's on the table. Take it or leave it. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't apologizing, wasn't even pretending to fix it. He was closing the door, daring me to either swallow it or walk out. I nodded once, collected my laptop, and walked out without another word. No slammed doors, no raised voice, just quiet, deliberate steps back to my floor. The office looked the same, rows of desks, the soft clatter of keyboards, but it wasn't the same to me. I glanced across the room at Jordan, Mia, and Ethan, each busy with work I had once taught them. They didn't even notice I'd been gone. I sat down, opened a blank spreadsheet, and began typing. I wasn't planning to vent or complain. I was planning to document. Every contribution, every project, every dollar I had saved this company that they thought was worth less than half of what they paid newcomers. The betrayal had been confirmed. Now came the preparation. Back at my desk, the air felt heavier, like the walls of Stratwell Dynamics had shifted against me. Trevor's words, "Take it or leave it," echoed in my head. Not as anger, but as clarity. For the first time in 11 years. I stopped making excuses for their choices. They had shown me exactly where I stood. I didn't storm out. I didn't whisper to colleagues or fire off a frustrated email. I opened a new spreadsheet and let the silence of the office fuel me. My fingers moved fast, not out of panic, but with a rhythm that felt inevitable. If they valued numbers so much, I would give them numbers they couldn't twist or ignore. The first tab, 2014, my entry-level year, when I designed a reconciliation tool from scratch because no vendor software could keep up with the volume. It still ran quietly in the background of our systems every single day. No bonus, no title bump, just good initiative scribbled on a performance review. The second tab, 2015. I flagged a vendor invoicing scheme that would have cost us over $600,000. The case was buried in archives, but I kept every email, every signature. My notes became proof, year by year. I built it out. 2016-2020, turnover chaos, when I trained new hires while holding my own workload together. 2021, I managed a six-figure reconciliation during a system migration they swore required a team of 4. I completed it alone, under budget, ahead of schedule. 2022, I caught an error in our forecasting model that would have triggered nearly $1 million of wasted inventory. A red pen, a spreadsheet, a long night, and no one ever knew. By midnight, I had 10 tabs. By 2 a.m., I had 20. Each one crisp, undeniable, not written like a brag sheet, but an operational map of loyalty. Facts, timelines, outcomes. I didn't stop until the clock crept past 4 a.m. The last page was a total $312,875 saved in the past year alone because of systems I had built and monitored. Against that, my pay gap, $3,900 less than those I trained. I stared at the number until my eyes blurred. The hidden cost of loyalty. That was the title I typed onto the cover page. At dawn. I printed the report and had it bound at a 24-hour copy shop downtown. The clerk slid the finished product across the counter, heavy in my hands, with my name on the title page in bold. 11 years of invisible work finally visible. Back in my apartment. Steam fogged the mirror as I stood in front of it, dressed in the charcoal suit I had worn to my father's funeral. Not for mourning this time, but as armor. Tomorrow, I would walk into Stratwell not as the overlooked employee they thought they owned, but as the woman holding the invoice for 11 years of silence. Morning arrived sharper than usual. The streets of Chicago glistened under a thin mist as I walked into Stratwell Dynamics at 7:20 a.m. To anyone else, It looked like any other Tuesday. To me, it was the beginning of the end. I carried 3 things in my bag: a signed resignation letter, a formal job offer from Halcyon Advisory Group, and the thick bound report that had cost me a night's sleep but crystallized 11 years of work into undeniable proof. My stride was steady as I crossed the lobby and stepped into the elevator. No hesitation, no tremor in my hands. The executive floor was quiet, too early for most of them to arrive. Richard Vaughn, our CEO, wasn't in yet, but I didn't need him there. His mahogany desk was exactly where I pictured it the night before. I placed the resignation letter on the left, the Halcyon offer in the center, $150,000 base, full benefits, and my report on the right. 3 items, 3 truths. No sticky notes, no explanation, no waiting around. I left his office as quietly as I entered, my shoes clicking against the marble like punctuation marks. By the time the receptionist noticed me leaving, I was already back in the elevator, heading down to my floor. At my desk, everything looked the same. Jordan was frowning at an Excel formula that I had built months ago. Mia scrolled through templates I had designed. Ethan paced the aisle with his phone pressed to his ear, throwing around jargon he barely understood. None of them noticed me. None of them suspected a thing. I opened my inbox and began the day as if nothing had changed, checking vendor queries, updating the close schedule, flagging small errors. Calm, methodical, invisible, just as I had always been. Except this time, I wasn't staying invisible. By 10:04 a.m., my inbox pinged, "Elm Room, now." The summons wasn't a surprise. I closed my laptop, took my notebook as if heading into another project sync, and walked with measured steps toward the glass-walled conference room that always felt colder than it looked. Inside sat Richard at the head of the table, Trevor 2 seats down, Marcus Hale with his laptop open, and Clara Denton, arms crossed, unreadable. My report lay in front of them, pages already dog-eared, evidence they had been rifling through it since sunrise. Richard gestured toward the empty chair across from him. I remained standing. "Your analysis is extensive," he said carefully. I nodded once. "So is my tenure." The silence that followed told me everything. They hadn't expected me to come prepared, hadn't expected me to hold my ground. But I wasn't there to plead. I was there to prove. Are you still there? Of all the details, which stuck out to you the most? The resignation letter, the thick report, or the way Elowen walked out of the room without a word? And where do you think this story will end? Stay until the end, because what happens next will surprise the entire board. The air in the Elm Room was colder than the rest of the floor, as if the glass walls had been designed to drain warmth along with privacy. Richard Vaughn sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid but trying to appear calm. Trevor Lang, our CFO, leaned forward with his hands folded too tightly, knuckles pale. Marcus Hale had his laptop open, but his fingers hovered above the keys like he was waiting for someone to tell him what to type. Clara Denton stood slightly apart, arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on me like she was dissecting every word before I spoke it. My report lay in the center of the table, pages bent and ink smudged from hands that had already flipped through it in a panic. Richard gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." I stayed standing. "I'll keep this brief. That document spells out 11 years of measurable results, millions in savings, 0 failures, and a track record your new hires couldn't dream of replicating. The numbers are clear." Trevor cleared his throat. "Elowen. Raises are standardized. 3% annually is policy." His voice carried the kind of false sympathy that only sharpened the insult. "Standardized for whom?" I asked. "Because Jordan, Mia, and Ethan weren't here long enough to call it policy before they passed me by." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are you asking for?" I didn't hesitate. "Salary match at $150,000. Back pay for the last fiscal year. categorized as a performance bonus, and a formal pay equity review across finance operations. Marcus actually gasped, his chair squeaking against the floor. To him, it probably sounded like I had asked for the keys to the building. Clara said nothing, but her gaze sharpened, as if calculating in real time whether I was bluffing. Richard leaned back, clasping his hands. "You're asking for a lot." "No," I replied evenly. "I'm asking for what I've already earned." Finally, Richard leaned forward, elbows on the polished table. "We'll need 24 hours. I shook my head once. "You have until tomorrow morning. My resignation is already on your desk. And that clock doesn't stop. I'm not bluffing." Richard's jaw tightened, but he gave the smallest nod. "You'll hear from us soon." I closed my notebook, turned, and walked out without another word. Back at my desk. The office buzzed with ordinary noise, emails, phones, whispered conversations. But for me, the ground had shifted. I had said what they never expected me to say, and now they had to decide whether they could afford to ignore me. The next move would no longer be mine. It would be theirs. They didn't wait a full 24 hours. By early afternoon, Trevor appeared at my desk, pale and tight-lipped, asking me to step into the maple room. His tone made it sound like a casual request, but the twitch in his jaw told me it was anything but. Inside, the mood was different from the elm room. More bodies, more strategy. Richard was already seated, his cufflinks gleaming under the sterile lights. Clara stood near the window, arms crossed, her silence heavier than any argument. And next to Richard sat a man I hadn't seen before. Navy suit, slick smile, a legal pad open in front of him. "Victor Collins," Richard said smoothly. "Company counsel." Victor rose halfway, as if we were old acquaintances. "Elowen. Pleasure. Thank you for joining us." I didn't shake his hand. I sat, folded my hands on the table, and waited. Richard slid a folder across the table. "We've reviewed your concerns. This is our revised offer." I opened it. Director of Financial Strategy. Base salary, $155,000. Performance bonus potential, $45,000. Access to executive meetings, strategic initiatives, even the internal audit committee. It was everything I had demanded, and more. Almost too much. Before I could speak, Victor placed another folder in front of me. This one thinner. His smile practiced. "This is just a routine update to your confidentiality agreement, given the new position." I flipped it open. Pages of legalese blurred past until my eyes landed on Section 6. Compensation structures, unusual financial activity, tightly worded clauses about non-disclosure, tailored so specifically they might as well have been written with my name on them. "You're making this conditional," I said evenly, not looking up. "Not at all," Victor replied smoothly. "This is standard housekeeping. Nothing unusual." Trevor shifted in his chair, avoiding my gaze. Clara's eyes stayed locked on me, sharp and unflinching, as if trying to read whether I would take the bait. Richard tapped his pen against the table once, twice, like a nervous tick he couldn't suppress. I closed the folder slowly. "I'll need time to review this." Victor nodded with that same polished grin. "Of course! Take all the time you need, but the sooner we finalize, the sooner we can move forward." I gathered both folders, one glittering with opportunity, the other humming with hidden chains, and stood. No one stopped me. Back at my desk, I slid the NDA into the side pocket of my bag. My heart didn't pound. It stayed steady, almost cold, because I already knew what they didn't. This wasn't about a promotion, or a raise, or even recognition for the last year and a half. I had been tracking discrepancies in vendor payments, names that didn't exist, invoices that always bent in one direction, signatures repeating like a pattern. They thought they were offering me leverage, but I already had it, and soon, they would understand exactly how much. The maple room had ended with folders in my hands and false smiles on their faces. But as I walked back through the cubicles, I already knew their mistake. They thought the NDA was a leash. They had no idea I'd spent the last 18 months building something stronger than their contracts. Evidence. It had started as a nagging instinct. Vendor payments that didn't line up. Rounding errors that always leaned the same way. Purchase orders signed off by the same two managers every single time. Most people would have shrugged, called it human error, and moved on. I didn't. I opened a private file and began cataloging. Dates, approval chains, invoice numbers, even the internal emails pushing transactions through with flimsy justifications. At first, it was small, hundreds slipping through unnoticed. But quarter after quarter, the pattern grew bolder. By the time the totals crossed into the millions, I knew this wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate. Fake vendor names, PO, boxes with no physical address. Adjustments made just below audit thresholds. I followed the trail like breadcrumbs, and every breadcrumb led me closer to the same conclusion. Someone inside was siphoning money. Now, with the NDA sitting in my bag. The timing was laughable. Routine housekeeping? No, it was a trap, an attempt to silence me before I could point to the rot. And they assumed I was too hungry for validation to notice. That night, I didn't call anyone, didn't pour a drink, didn't scroll through distractions. I sat at my kitchen table with the city lights flickering through the blinds and opened my private archive. Page after page of transactions. Maps I'd built connecting shell companies to holding accounts. Inconsistencies highlighted in red. And at the center of it all, the same signatures. Victor Collins. The so-called company counsel. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the name. The irony was sharp enough to taste. They had brought him into the maple room to intimidate me with contracts, not realizing he was the very reason the contracts mattered. By midnight, I had a timeline printed and organized into a slim black folder. Not as thick as the report I had given Richard, but far more dangerous. This wasn't about missed raises or salary gaps anymore. This was about embezzlement, millions bleeding from Stratwell under their noses. I slid the folder into my bag, zipped it shut, and let out a slow breath. They thought they had me contained. They thought dangling a promotion and burying me under paperwork would end the story. But I wasn't chasing their validation anymore. I was holding their downfall in my hands. The invitation arrived disguised as routine. Marcus Hale's email hit my inbox late Sunday. Final wrap-up meeting. Cedar Room. 9:00 a.m. The subject line was casual, harmless on the surface, but I recognized it immediately. This wasn't a wrap-up, it was containment. When I stepped into the Cedar Room Monday morning, the atmosphere told the truth. The space was larger, colder, glass walls pretending transparency, but carrying the weight of surveillance. Richard Vaughn sat at the head of the table, Patagonia vest layered over a crisp shirt. His attempt at approachable betrayed by the stiffness in his shoulders. Clara Denton stood near the window, her arms crossed, the fatigue around her eyes impossible to ignore. Trevor Lang had a binder open but didn't read it, his pen tapping like a nervous metronome. Beside Richard was Victor Collins, calm and rehearsed as always, too focused on flipping his legal pad to even look at me. At the far end, a screen glowed to life. Board chair Amelia Grant appeared, her face sharp, expression stripped of ceremony. "Let's begin," she said. Richard rose, clearing his throat. "Elowen, we appreciate your contributions, and we believe we've found a resolution." I cut him off. A black folder hit the polished table with a soft thud. "Before we finalize anything, there's one more matter." The room froze. "You've got a $2.7 million embezzlement problem." I opened the folder, sliding forward the first page. A transaction map spanning 18 months. Red highlighted payments to non-existent vendors. PO. Boxes with no employees. No offices. Structured amounts. always just under audit thresholds. These vendor codes were created manually outside your procurement system, I continued, flipping pages. And here's where it leads. Pinerove Partners, Delaware Shell, no staff, no office, just a funnel. Amelia's voice cut in. Who controls it? I pushed the final page forward, finger landing on a signature. Public records tie it to your brother-in-law, Mr. Collins, and these adjustments, I tapped 3 entries, carry your initials. Victor's mask slipped. This is baseless. It's not accusation, I said flatly. It's data. Clara's eyes narrowed, betrayal dawning. Richard stumbled toward Victor, his voice breaking. Tell me this isn't... Amelia's tone was steel. External auditors will be engaged immediately. Mr. Collins, you are not to leave the building. Victor shoved back his chair, muttering about rights. But the door opened. 2 security officers stepped in, flanking him with quiet precision. His polished shoes echoed against the floor as they escorted him out, each strike like a gavel. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then Amelia spoke again, calm and decisive. Elowen, send everything to the audit committee within the hour. We'll take it from here. I nodded once. The Cedar Room wasn't just a meeting that morning. It was detonation. And the smoke was only beginning to rise. The building felt different the next morning. Quieter, heavier. Whispers moved faster than emails, and the echo of Friday's explosion in the Cedar Room lingered in every corridor. People didn't meet my eyes, but I could sense they knew something had shifted. By 9 o'clock, the official word came down. Victor Collins, company counsel, had been escorted out and placed under formal investigation. His office door was already locked, nameplate stripped clean. The story spread fast. External auditors were on site, combing through records. Employees pretended to work, but the tension was a live current humming beneath every keystroke. 2 mid-level staffers, Amanda and Josh, were quietly suspended. Whether they were complicit or simply careless didn't matter now. The board wanted heads to roll. Clara Denton, usually composed, looked brittle as she walked the floor, fielding questions she couldn't answer. Trevor Lang avoided me altogether, retreating into conference calls that seemed more like excuses than strategy. And Richard Vaughn, the man who once told me, take it or leave it, was unraveling. On Monday's executive call, he made a public apology, his voice shaking as he talked about integrity and restoring trust. No one looked convinced. You can't patch a cracked foundation with buzzwords. As for me, I kept my head down, finishing the month-end close as if nothing extraordinary had happened. My badge still worked, my login still active. It wasn't loyalty keeping me there, it was closure. I wanted them to feel the weight of my presence while the walls came down around them. 2 days before, I was set to start at Halcyon. My phone buzzed. Richard's number. Against my better judgment. I answered. Elowen, he began, trying for calm but landing somewhere between desperate and defeated. I know things ended abruptly. Our team is struggling with some of your systems. We'd like to bring you on as a consultant. I let the silence stretch. Finally, I said. There's a 60-day knowledge transfer binder in the shared drive. I left it the day I gave notice. He exhaled, almost a groan. We didn't open that. Name your price. Whatever's reasonable. Just help us through the transition. Ça? My answer was steady. My price was 11 years of fair treatment. And then I hung up. No goodbye, no negotiation. That call told me everything I needed. They weren't in control anymore. They were scrambling, reaching for the very person they'd undervalued into invisibility. And I was already gone. As I packed the last of my things that afternoon, I glanced across the office one final time. Jordan still argued with broken formulas. Mia still leaned on templates I had written. Ethan still stumbled through calls with jargon he didn't understand. The irony cut sharp, but the anger was gone. What remained was clarity. Stratwell Dynamics was collapsing under its own weight, and for the first time in 11 years, I didn't have to hold it up. The glass doors of Halcyon Advisory Group slid open at 8:02 a.m., and for the first time in years, I walked into an office without the weight of invisibility pressing down on me. The air felt different, lighter, sharper, almost celebratory. At the end of the main hallway, sunlight poured across a frosted panel with bold black letters, Elowen Hart, Chief Financial Officer. I paused for just a second, long enough to take in the truth of it, after 11 years of being overlooked. Here it was. My name, my title, my recognition. Coffee? Gideon Blake leaned into the doorway, holding out a cup with a grin. He'd been my quiet ally long before this day, the one who believed in building systems that actually served people. Ready to build something better? He asked. I smiled. I've been ready for 11 years. And so we did. In 6 months, Halcyon wasn't just succeeding, it was thriving. Together. We pulled in 3 of Stratwell's largest accounts, the ones I used to manage in silence while others reaped the praise. This time, my name signed the contracts. The policies I implemented became the backbone of our culture. Open salary bands, quarterly reviews anchored in measurable impact, whistleblower channels that could not be buried under red tape. Employees no longer whispered about fairness. They lived it. Meanwhile, Stratwell unraveled. Richard Vaughn resigned under pressure. Though the press release painted it as personal reasons, Clara Denton sent a 5-line farewell email and vanished before the acquisition closed. Trevor Lang, the polished CFO who once told me 3% is policy, was stripped of influence, reduced to approving expense reports from a cubicle near the copier. The empire that dismissed me had hollowed itself out. Some nights, when the city was quiet and my office light was the only one burning, I thought about how easily it could have gone differently. A simple acknowledgement, a fair raise, a moment of recognition. That was all it would have taken to keep me. But then I looked around at Halcyon, the thriving team, the trust we'd built, the culture of clarity that finally gave people the dignity they deserved. And I knew this was the path I was always meant to take. Knowing your worth is not arrogance. It is survival. And when others refuse to see it, you don't wait for their permission. You calculate your value, present the truth, and walk away if they won't pay it. That isn't revenge. That's business. So tell me, what part of Elowen's journey resonated most with you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tap like if her story inspired you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story.